El Chapo appeared in court with a list of complaints.
There's a letter from El Chapo in which he implies that U.S. prison officials are bullying him because he has escaped before.
There is such a thing as evil, and some people are evil.
Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán, the infamous drug lord who once ruled the Sinaloa Cartel, is back in the headlines. Rumors are swirling that the man who twice escaped from maximum security prisons in Mexico might be plotting his most unbelievable breakout yet. But this time, El Chapo isn't dealing with the corrupt system he once manipulated with ease. He's locked up in ADX Florence, the United States' most secure and unforgiving prison, a place designed to hold the country's most dangerous criminals. If El Chapo dares to attempt an escape here, he might find that American justice has teeth far sharper than he's ever encountered. The consequences could be swift, severe, and, worst of all, permanent. This isn't Mexico, where he could bribe guards or dig elaborate tunnels. In Florence, Colorado, El Chapo might discover that some cages are truly inescapable, and some punishments are worse than he could ever imagine.
One of the world's richest, most notorious drug kingpins broke out of prison.
Former cartel leader is considered one of the most dangerous drug traffickers in the world.
Let's rewind the clock a bit and look at how El Chapo earned his reputation as the Houdini of drug lords. His escape acts aren't just impressive, they're the stuff of legend, the kind of stories that make prison wardens wake up in a cold sweat. Our story starts way back in 2001. El Chapo was already a big deal in the drug world, but he wasn't yet the larger-than-life figure that we know today. He'd been caught in Guatemala in 1993 and extradited to Mexico to face charges of murder and drug trafficking. For 8 years, he'd been cooling his heels in the Puente Grande prison, a place the locals called Big Bridge. Sounds pretty secure, right? On January 19, 2001, El Chapo decided he'd had enough of prison life. Now, most inmates who want to escape might try to jump a fence and hope for the best. But not El Chapo. This guy was thinking way outside the box. Here's how it went down. A prison guard named Francisco El Chito Camberos Rivera opened El Chapo's cell door. El Chapo, cool as a cucumber, hopped into a laundry cart pushed by a maintenance worker named Javier Camberos. They rolled right through several doors and out the front gate. Once outside, El Chapo jumped into the trunk of a car and Javier drove him out of town. Now you might be thinking that it sounds way too easy, and you'd be right, but this wasn't some spur-of-the-moment plan. In fact, El Chapo had been working on this for years, slowly but surely, getting every prison official in his pocket. How much did this elaborate escape cost him? Allegedly, a cool $2.5 million, all split between no less than 78 people. You heard that right, 78 people were in on this escape. We're talking guards, maintenance workers, even local law enforcement who made sure El Chapo had a 24-hour head start before the manhunt began. And let's not forget the prison director himself, who was also paid to look the other way. It's like something straight out of a movie, isn't it? But this was real life, and El Chapo was just getting started. For the next 13 years, El Chapo was on the run. He became a legend, a ghost that haunted the mountains of Sinaloa. The Mexican government and the DEA were after him. But catching El Chapo was like trying to catch smoke with your bare hands. But even the wiliest of foxes eventually makes a mistake. In February 2014, El Chapo's luck ran out. The Mexican Navy tracked him down to a beach resort in Mazatlan. They caught him in his underwear, no less. It's pretty safe to say that this was an embarrassing ordeal for a man of El Chapo's status, and you'd think that would be the end of the story. El Chapo, caught twice, surely wouldn't get another chance to escape. But you'd be wrong. Fast forward to July 11th, 2015. El Chapo's been locked up in the Altiplano Federal Prison, Mexico's most secure facility. The government had sworn up and down that this time, there was no way El Chapo could escape. They'd learned their lesson, they said. Turns out, they hadn't learned as much as they thought. At 8:52 p.m., the security camera in El Chapo's cell showed him walking into his shower area, and then, out of nowhere, he seemingly vanished without a trace.
Videos capturing the crucial moments before Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán escapes from that maximum security prison. Watch as he paces back and forth before taking off the tracking bracelet, monitoring his every move. He walks to his shower area, ducks behind the wall, bends down, and vanishes.
When the guards finally got around to checking his cell, they found a hole in the shower floor. But this wasn't just any hole. This was the entrance to an extremely elaborate tunnel. The tunnel was a mile long, equipped with lighting, ventilation, and even a motorcycle on rails. That's right, El Chapo didn't just escape, he escaped in style.
So this is the tunnel that Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán came out of. We're gonna go down and take a closer look.
Now, let's talk about this tunnel for a second. It wasn't just some hole in the ground. This thing was a feat of engineering. It was partially reinforced, with wooden planks for a ceiling. They even had a generator for power.
There's a generator here beside me, and the actual tunnel down to the length, the mile-long tunnel is right here. This is the crane that whoever constructed this tunnel used in order to take down and bring up heavy materials such as some of this machinery, and probably, I assume, some of the dirt and rock that was necessary to pull out of here in order to get this tunnel built.
And let's not forget about El Chapo's escape vehicle.
The government said this motorcycle contraption-like thing, it's not actually a motorcycle, it's some kind of vehicle that is fitted also with these little carts that was probably used to move the dirt. Well, is adapted. It doesn't have a front tire. It has a small energy source here. It can move forward and backward. Looks like a very old mining type vehicle.
It's clear that this wasn't some rushed job. This tunnel took months, maybe even years to build, and all right under the noses of the prison staff. Talk about embarrassing. The Mexican government was humiliated. Twice now, El Chapo had made them look like fools, but this time, they weren't taking any chances. The hunt for El Chapo was on, and it was bigger than ever. For 6 months, El Chapo managed to stay one step ahead of the law, but on January 8, 2016, his luck finally ran out. Mexican Marines raided a house in Los Mochis, Sinaloa. El Chapo and his security chief managed to escape through yet another secret tunnel, but they were caught a few hours later when they tried to flee in a stolen car. This time, there would be no more escapes from Mexican prisons. The United States wanted El Chapo, and Mexico was more than happy to hand him over.
The world's most wanted narco looked confused, overwhelmed even, asking the DEA agent, "Where am I?"
On January 19, 2017, El Chapo was finally extradited to the United States, and after a lengthy trial, he was found guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to life plus 30 years just to make sure he got the message. And where did they send him? To the ADX Florence in Colorado, also known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies. Now you might be thinking, surely this is the end of the story. There's no way El Chapo can escape from a US Supermax prison, right? And you'd probably be right. But here's the thing, with El Chapo, you can never be too sure. Let's talk about ADX Florence for a second. This place is no joke. It's designed to hold the worst of the worst. Terrorists, spies, cartel leaders, the kind of people the US government never wants to see on the streets again. El Chapo's not happy with his new digs. He's used to running the show, even from behind bars. But in Florence, he's just another inmate. El Chapo spends 23 hours a day in a small concrete cell. His only human contact is with the guards who bring him his meals. It's a far cry from the life of luxury he enjoyed in Mexican prisons, and he might even be getting the short end of the stick now that he's in US custody, precisely because of his high profile.
It's a letter from El Chapo in which he implies that US prison officials are bullying him because he has escaped before.
But here's where things get interesting. The best predictor of future behavior is usually past behavior, and El Chapo's past behavior suggests that he's not the type to just sit quietly and serve his time. In fact, there are signs that El Chapo might be up to his old tricks. In the leaked letter written by the man himself, he alleges that prison authorities are preventing him from receiving attorney documents for new court motions. Now, on the surface, this might seem like a legitimate complaint. After all, every prisoner, regardless of how evil they are, has the right to communicate with their lawyers, right? But let's remember who we're dealing with here. This is El Chapo, the man who turned prison escapes into an art form. What if these attorney documents aren't what they seem? What if El Chapo is trying to get information about the prison layout, guard schedules, or security measures? It might sound far-fetched, but with El Chapo's track record, you can never be too careful. And it's not just about escape plans. There's evidence that El Chapo might still be running his cartel from behind bars. Let's also look at this excerpt from a letter he allegedly wrote to his wife. Regarding El Cleto, increase the production to make it last. Send my regards to El Cleto. Tell him to please help me out so that the first sale is on my behalf, because I have a lot of expenses here. If this letter is genuine, it implies that El Chapo is still very much involved in the day-to-day operations of the Sinaloa Cartel, and that's a big problem for the US authorities. So, let's imagine for a moment that El Chapo does try to escape from ADX Florence. What might that look like? Well, first of all, it wouldn't be anything like his escapes in Mexico. ADX Florence is a whole different ballgame. The walls are made of reinforced concrete and are virtually impenetrable. The windows are designed so that inmates can't even tell where they are in the prison, and the entire facility is built on top of seismic sensors that can detect any tunneling attempts. But let's say El Chapo finds a way. Maybe he manages to bribe a guard, although that's a lot harder to do in a US prison. Or maybe he comes up with some ingenious plan that no one's thought of before. What then? If El Chapo somehow managed to get out of his cell, he'd still have to navigate a prison designed like a maze. Every door is controlled remotely, and the layout is intentionally confusing to disorient escaping prisoners. And even if he got past all that, he'd still have to deal with the armed guards in the prison towers. But let's take it a step further. Let's say, against all odds, El Chapo actually manages to get outside the prison walls. What then? He'd find himself in the middle of nowhere. That's problem number one. ADX Florence is surrounded by miles and miles of empty Colorado desert. There's nowhere to hide, nowhere to run, and you can bet that within minutes of his escape being detected, every law enforcement agency in the country would be on high alert. And that's problem number two. The manhunt for El Chapo would be unlike anything we've ever seen. It would make the hunt for Osama bin Laden look like a game of hide and seek. Every airport, every border crossing, every highway would be watched. El Chapo's face would be plastered on every TV screen and billboard in the country. And here's the kicker. Even if El Chapo somehow managed to evade capture, where would he go? He can't go back to Mexico. The government there would be all too happy to ship him right back to the US, and no other country would risk harboring him and incurring the wrath of the United States. But let's say El Chapo doesn't care about any of that. Let's say he's desperate enough to try anyway. What would the consequences be? First of all, any hopes El Chapo might have had of ever being released would go right out the window. Right now, he's serving life plus 30 years. If he tried to escape, you can bet they'd find a way to add even more time to that sentence. But more than that, an escape attempt would likely result in El Chapo facing even harsher conditions than he's already in. And trust me, it can get a lot worse. Just look at what's happening in El Salvador's new mega prison. This place makes ADX Florence look like a luxury resort. Inside this mega prison, you'll find some of El Salvador's most dangerous gang members packed into massive cells and stripped of even their most basic rights. They're crammed into overcrowded cells with no mattresses, no pillows, and lights that never turn off. They're not allowed any contact with the outside world, not even with their families. And the punishment for trying to escape? Let's just say it's not pleasant. In El Salvador's mega prison, rule breakers face a brutal punishment. They're thrown into isolation cells, tiny rooms locked from the outside with heavy padlocks. Imagine being completely alone in an empty room with absolutely nothing to distract you, not even for a few hours, but for days on end. It's not just boring, it's psychological torture. Your mind starts playing tricks on you. You lose track of time. The silence becomes deafening. It's the kind of experience that can break even the toughest criminals, and that's exactly what it's designed to do. Now, if El Chapo dares to attempt an escape from ADX Florence, he might find himself facing punishments that make his current situation seem like a luxury resort. The US prison system, while not as overtly brutal as El Salvador's mega prison, has its own ways of breaking even the most hardened criminals. At ADX Florence, inmates like El Chapo are already living in what amounts to a concrete tomb. But for those who step out of line, things can get much, much worse.
Chapo Guzmán, like the rest here, segregated and on permanent lockdown 23 hours a day.
This is El Chapo's current reality, but imagine if those precious few moments of relative freedom were taken away. In the most extreme cases, prisoners can be subjected to almost total isolation.
You can no longer be creative because you are constantly in one single spot in a 7 by 9 feet cell.
The psychological toll of such confinement is immense. Prisoners report feeling like they're being stripped of their humanity, becoming totally dependent on their jailers for every aspect of their lives.
You become totally dependent on the jailer, on the staff. You cannot even say, well, I'm going to go and reach for food is given to you. In the same environment, you do everything. You defecate because you got your toilet there.
It's easy to imagine how this complete loss of control could be devastating for someone like El Chapo, a man who is used to commanding an entire empire. The prison could ramp up security measures, subjecting him to even more frequent strip searches, limiting his already scarce contact with the outside world. Visits from family, which provide a lifeline for many prisoners, could be severely restricted or conducted through thick glass, preventing any physical contact.
When she touched the glass, her whole all the features in her face changed because she was expecting to talk to me and touch me, and so the glass prevented that. And it was to look at her face. It was a very horrifying experience. One that was extremely sad, and one that was extremely, when you almost break down in tears and you choke.
Moreover, any privileges El Chapo currently enjoys, like access to reading materials or the ability to correspond with the outside world, could be revoked. In the most extreme cases, prisoners can be held in near total sensory deprivation, a practice that has been described as a form of torture. The goal of such punishments isn't just to prevent further escape attempts, it's to break the spirit of even the most resilient inmate.
We don't have a problem with excessive number of shanks or homemade weapons being carried by inmates here.
Why? Because the prisoners know that the consequences of stepping out of line are simply too severe. For El Chapo, a man accustomed to power and control, such treatment could be particularly devastating. The constant surveillance, the lack of privacy, the inability to make even the smallest decisions for himself, all of these factors could chip away at his legendary resolve. And unlike in Mexico, where his cartel's influence could reach even into the most secure prisons, in ADX Florence, El Chapo is truly alone. So if El Chapo ever tried to escape, he'd likely find himself in even more restrictive confinement. He might lose what few privileges he currently has. His communications with the outside world, already limited, might be cut off entirely. So, what's El Chapo's next move? Is he really planning another great escape? Or has he finally accepted that his days of freedom are over? Only El Chapo knows for sure. But one thing's certain, the eyes of the world are watching. Every letter he writes, every move he makes is scrutinized. The legend of El Chapo, the man who could escape from any prison, is being put to the ultimate test. And who knows, maybe, just maybe, El Chapo has one last trick up his sleeve. After all, this is a man who's made a career out of doing the impossible. But if he does try to escape from ADX Florence, he might find that some cages are truly inescapable, and some punishments are worse than he could ever imagine. As we've seen, El Chapo's story is far from over. The man who once ruled over $1 billion drug empire now finds himself in the most secure prison in the United States. Will he accept his fate, or will he risk everything for one last shot at freedom? Only time will tell, but one thing's for sure, whatever El Chapo does next, the world will be watching. So, what do you think? Will El Chapo try to escape again, or has he finally met his match in ADX Florence? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about the world's most notorious criminals. Until next time, stay safe.